Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ongoing virtual program of formation for Augustinian vocation promoters and formators. This is the course Affectivity and the Celibate and Communal Life. I'm Father Ray Dlugos, OSA, from Merrimack College in North Andover, Massachusetts, and this is our second session, week 2, and it's subtitled, There's No Such Thing as an Intrinsically Ordered Sexuality. And that has two meanings, which I'll go into in more detail. But essentially, it's taking off on that very unfortunate phrase that was used to describe homosexuality as an intrinsically disordered sexuality. We'll talk about that a little bit. But more importantly, an ordered sexuality has nothing to do with whether it's heteronormative or normative or the way everyone thinks it's supposed to be. All of our sexualities start out disordered. And we go through a process, if we're healthy, if we have integrity, and if we are desirous of being fully human and as holy as we can be, to put our sexuality in order, to use it the way it is intended to be used, to bring it how it'll bring us true life and do as little harm as possible. And in that way, every single person is called to an ongoing, lifelong process that never ends of continually ordering our sexuality toward that end for which it was made, namely union with God and love for one another. So the readings for this week, a little bit about them. The first one was entitled Sexuality and Interiority. And it also, like the article you read last week, is from a talk that I gave at the International Formation Conference held in Rome in July 2004 on the overall themes of affectivity and interiority. Most of what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is based on that article, actually the article explains more completely what I'm going to be talking about here. But I also asked you to read 2 monographs from the American Psychological Association offering short, simple, basic understanding from a psychological perspective of this emerging experience that we're seeing exploding all around us, of seeing human sexuality as something that is diverse and pluriform rather than binary and normative. LGBTQ doesn't even come close to capturing the diversity and the mysterious diversity and the beautiful diversity or potentially beautiful diversity of human sexuality as it is manifested in human persons. So we're struggling with that in so many ways, but it is now part of the conversation, and we are going to have to make it part of the conversation on chaste celibacy and human sexuality. And I also added an article that might be helpful from a prominent American scripture scholar, Walter Brueggemann, who is a Protestant, a Methodist, but he's a brilliant scripture scholar. And he's exploring how the Bible, which looks like it condemns homosexuality as an abomination, that may not be the whole story of the Bible regarding homosexuality. And he'll mine the Bible, especially the wisdom literature and the prophets, for another view than the Levitical laws condemning homosexuality. So we might find that helpful. First of all, let's look at what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to look at 2 realities. First, there's going to be, and as we talked about last week, it's important to look at realities that we experience in our lives without denial or illusion. Tell the truth about them. So the first reality that we're going to look at is the reality of human sexuality. And we're going to try to tell the truth about human sexuality in general and invite each one of us to tell the truth about our own sexuality, our own personal sexuality, without denial or illusion. The second reality we're going to explore is the reality of a commitment to chaste celibacy. What does that mean? What does it call us to? What's it for? What's its purpose? What are some of the things that are true of someone who is experiencing the call to live their lives in according to celibate chastity. And then there's a third relationship or a third experience that we'll have to look at a little bit. And that's the experience of what happens when the power and energy of our sexuality crashes into the reality and the truth of the boundary we have placed on it by a vow of celibate chastity. In each one of those, we experience those. And as we talked last week, they evoke emotions, they reveal needs, they call forth our values. In having each one of those experiences, the experience of being sexual beings, the experience of being vowed to celibate chastity, the experience that happens when our human sexuality crashes into our vow of celibate chastity, all of those evoke those emotions, reveal those needs, and call us to ask about our values. And in those, we're invited to explore just what we are called to do, how we are called to respond to each one of those three realities in a way that is going to be life-giving and as fully human as possible. So let's start with the reality of human sexuality. It's both a blessing and a curse. Without human sexuality, the human species would not survive. And that's why it has so much power. Literally, the human race depends on human sexuality for its survival and its ongoing reproduction. Human sexuality provides us with the drive within us to want to connect with each other. It makes us interested in each other. Without human sexuality, there would be no interest in love, relationships, friendship, community, anything that joins us together in connection to one another. Human sexuality is simultaneously the most creative and the most destructive force in the universe. As a creative force, it generates life. It allows for and motivates and drives the giving and receiving of selves. That is love, the love of the Trinity. The giving and receiving is a sexual giving and receiving. Teilhard de Chardin has this wonderful quotation. Someday, after harnessing the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energy of love. And then for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. Human sexuality is energy. Unharnessed energy is destructive. Harnessed energy is incredibly powerful for good. So as a destructive force, sexuality frequently and often is used as a weapon to assert dominance and to impose submission on others. It contributes to the disintegration of persons. We fall apart. Augustine used that phrase as he's talking about his own experience of his sexuality in the Confessions. I was falling apart. He talks about that in book 2. As a destructive force, human sexuality causes us and motivates us to turn other people into objects rather than persons. Objects for our exploitation and our use and our pleasure, without regard for the fact that they are persons in their own right. And as a destructive force, human sexuality contributes to our tendency, the opposite of giving and receiving. It contributes to our tendency to take and hoard. Some more realities about sexuality without denial or illusion. We live in creation, and creation is a sexual place. Sexuality and sexual energy is pervasive in creation and therefore in all human experiences. That's absolutely true. We live in a sexual world. We have a tendency to sexualize the world and make it only about sexuality, but that's not the point. Sexuality is part of the whole ecosystem of creation, and we are living in that. We're part of an alive and reproducing ecosystem that's driven by sexual energy. And so consequently, there is no such thing as an experience in life that is in some way, shape, or form not sexual, in which some sexuality, some sexual energy is not present, especially the relationships that involve persons in relationships of any kind. As I say in the article, I frequently challenge groups that I talk to give me some examples, and no one has convinced me yet that there's an experience of life that is not somehow, some way related to our sexuality. The ordering of our sexuality, moving it from disordered to ordered, which is really what we're going to be talking about here. The ordering of our sexuality requires us to first recognize how sexuality is present in our experience. It's only when we can recognize its presence that we're going to be able to respond to it in freedom. If we don't recognize it, we will be reacting to it without freedom. And everyone's individual sexuality is a unique mystery that invites and calls us to discover the truth about ourselves and the one who created us in the divine image. So questions of sex, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation, those are some of the ways in which each person's sexuality is unique to them. And as I said at the outset, we are now bombarded with information and stimulation and explanations of how that is true. And all of us are called to express ourselves as sexual beings with integrity, respect, and care for self and others. That's what an ordered sexuality is going to look like. And that doesn't matter whether you are heterosexual, homosexual, transgendered, cisgendered, whatever might be true about your sexuality. We're called to express ourselves as sexual beings with integrity, respect, and care for ourselves and for others. And anything less than that is going to be a disordered sexuality. So there is no such thing as an intrinsically ordered sexuality. It's a lifelong project for everyone. I once read a book when I was teaching high school students. The book was called The Good News About Sex. And it had a stunning statement at the end talking about the Virgin Mary. And it tried to make the case that unlike how we talk about it all the time, virginity is not something we once had and then lose by engaging in sexual activity. Virginity is something we become over the course of our lives as we integrate all aspects of ourselves into a unified whole. And when our sexuality is integrated with the rest of us as a servant to the whole person, then we can say that we're virgins. The first step in ordering our sexuality so that there's a source in life and love is to discover the truth about our unique sexuality. And that truth needs to be discovered. It's not chosen. And that can be hard because we might find truths about ourselves that we don't want to be true about us. But we need to discover them and then learn to embrace and accept what is true of us because it is how we have been made rather than how we choose to be. So for formators and vocation promoters, we cannot assume that all candidates and persons in religious formation have ordered sexuality until the opposite becomes apparent. If we do that, we're doing everyone a disservice. We have to assume that everyone coming to us, including ourselves, and everyone ahead of us or around us, is in some process of trying to discover the truth about their sexuality, which may be in all ways disordered and disarranged, not serving us, but harming us, and going through a process of ordering it so that it becomes our servant. So one of the tasks of formation communities is creating a climate where exploring, discovering, and sharing what is true about each person's sexuality is essential to formation for lives of celibate chastity. But again, growing into healthy and holy chaste celibate starts with the naming the truth of our sexuality. So there are behaviors can be seen by others, even if they're hidden. There's an inner experience that we have that are not behaviors. They are only known to the person and have to be listened to carefully. But sometimes disordered sexuality or not yet ordered sexuality will become manifest in behaviors that are rather overt and could be viewed and seen by others, even though they're often hidden. These are not all equal in seriousness. That's very important. Certainly, predatory behavior like grooming is a symptom of a sign, rather, of a not yet ordered sexuality. Desiring sex with partners unable to give consent, whether that because of age or power differential or anything else. The desire for that is a sign and a symptom of a not yet ordered sexuality. Anonymous sex, serious sexual relationships, casual sex, sex that isn't connected with relationality, giving and receiving, and love is going to be a not yet ordered sexuality. Pornography and other forms of fantasy sex, prostitution in all of its forms are signs and symptoms of a not yet ordered sexuality. And I would say least serious of them, but still a sign and a symptom of a not yet ordered sexuality, is autoerotic sex or masturbation. And how compulsive that is reveals how much not yet ordered it is. In the article, in the article, I make reference to this thing of unredeemed and redeemed maleness, where the characteristics of unredeemed maleness is the desire to have as many sexual partners as possible to show our potency and our power, to have as many children as possible, not for love, but to show our potency and our power, to have as many possessions as possible. Whoever dies with the most toys wins, and to control and dominate as many others as possible. Unredeemed maleness, and almost this is the instinctive way males are designed. We are called to a redeemed maleness, and those unredeemed parts of us, under the power and grace of God, can be transformed into redeemed maleness, which will look much more like chastity and poverty and obedience and the willingness to put ourselves in to be the least of all rather than the most of all. That's a process that we all go through. My favorite example of unredeemed maleness as a prototype, as the archetype, is Genghis Khan, whose modus operandi as he was conquering Asia was to conquer a tribe, defeat them in battle, immediately kill all the males, and then try to impregnate all the women. About 25 years ago, a genetic study of the world's population came out with the results that 20% of the human beings alive today have a DNA genetic connection to Genghis Khan. So he made a good run at being a fully unredeemed male. So that's sexuality without denial or illusion. It's a mystery. It's a process. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that here. But celibate chastity is also an experience. And the commitment to celibate chastity becomes a reality once it is made. So we need to look at what celibate chastity really is without denial or illusion. Chastity is the process of moving toward a more ordered and integrated sexual being. Consequently, every human being, regardless of what is true about their natural sexuality, is called to chastity, called to engage in this process of moving it from disintegrated and disordered, unharnessed, into an ordered, integrated, and harnessed reality so that it serves life and serves love and does as little harm as possible while doing as much good as possible. Celibate chastity is a particular way of being sexual that requires a particular way of ordering one's sexuality. Someone once said in a talk that I heard, marriage is celibacy with one exception, a very important exception. But still, married people are called to chastity as much as celibate people. Single people are called to chastity. Gay people are called to chastity. Transgendered people are called to chastity. Everyone is called to chastity. Celibate chastity is a choice to express our sexuality in a particular way that requires a particular ordering. Celibate chastity is a way of being sexual, of expressing oneself in a sexual way, not of avoiding or denying the reality of one's sexual nature. I'm going to keep repeating that over and over again. Celibate chastity is a way of being sexual. It is not a way of not being sexual. These are things that may not be, that just need to be said. The experience of celibate chastity is difficult. It's sometimes painful. And it's supposed to be. That's the point. It's supposed to be transformative. It's supposed to put us in states of dissonance so that we can grow. It's not supposed to be so painful that it destroys our integrity. And when that's happening, then something needs to be adjusted somewhere. But that it's easy, or that it's hard sometimes, or that it causes us to suffer, doesn't necessarily mean we are not still called to it. It may be through that difficulty that it is doing its transformative work of ordering us for love and for life and for God. Well, chaste celibacy is theoretically a vocation in and of itself. And we'll make this point more next week. And it is the essence, according to Sandra Snyder's, the essence of a vocation to religious life. But so often, it's made secondary. People enter ministry and embrace celibacy for the sake of priestly ministry, or they embrace celibacy for the sake of living in community life. But the call is really to celibacy first, out of which flows ministry and community life. Community life will not substitute for the relationships that are sacrificed by a commitment to celibate chastity. There are no substitutes for the relationship sacrificed. That's why it's a sacrifice. Poverty and obedience are the vows that order our community life. Sharing all things in common, putting the common good ahead of our own, not our own before the common good. That makes life in community possible. Celibate chastity drives our search for encounter with God, which is a very sexual search, desire, longing. And the purpose of celibate chastity is to give us that energy to search for that deep intimacy with God. Celibate chastity will result in loneliness. And loneliness is not an unfortunate side effect. It's the point. If we're celibate and we're lonely, something may be right rather than something may be wrong. We will explore that theme more fully next week. So here's cut to the chase here. Chaste celibacy is to know oneself as a fully sexual person with all of the drives, all of the needs, all of the longings, and all of the desires that sexuality entails, being fully aware that those drives will not be gratified and those needs will not be met. Both have to be true at the same time for celibate chastity to be what it is supposed to be. We experience the full power of our sexuality and all that it drives us towards. And at the same time, we have to admit, acknowledge, and accept that we are not going to gratify those drives and we're not going to meet the needs revealed by those drives. Of course, that creates a state of tension, an enormous tension. And again, as I said last week, it's these experiences of tension is where we get to know the truth about ourselves. And celibate chastity crashing into the reality of our sex, or the power of our sexuality, is going to be a very tense experience. And therefore, it is fraught with the possibility of revelation and transformation, transforming us into the fully human persons we are meant to be. But of course, the tension can be so great that, like all tension in human beings, we want to bring about its resolution as quickly as possible. And when we prematurely resolve the tension created by the clash between the power of our sexuality and the reality of our commitment to celibate chastity, the only way we can do it is to deny one or the other of or both of those. Grace is found not in the resolution of the tension, but in being in the tension. That's where grace can do its work of redeeming us, of redeeming our unredeemedness and redeeming us for life and for love and for God. So here how you can prematurely resolve the tension, and none of these are good. We can try to deny our sexual drive, and we have a lot of tools that might help us tell ourselves that sexuality is not going to control us. We don't have it. It rises from that very Gnostic and Manichaean belief that flesh is bad and spirit is good, and sexuality is all about flesh and holiness is all about spirit. So there cannot be any space for sexuality in a life of holiness, and that has done nothing but destroy people. We do that by spiritualizing everything. The only thing that matters is the life of the spirit. The life of the body is an enemy that needs to be repressed, controlled, beaten down. It becomes a source of shame and therefore can do all kinds of damage to us. We can deny our sexual drive by just living in our heads, making everything a problem to be solved rather than the mystery to be lived, analyzing everything instead of experiencing emotions. We live from the neck up. We're going to deny that we have sexuality, which happens below the neck and below the belt and below lots of things. But it is still very real and very powerful part of us. And avoiding emotions. Emotions and sexuality live very close together in our psyches. So you risk feeling anything, feeling happy, you might risk feeling sexual. And so you don't. We suppress feelings of all kinds. So we can try to deny our sexual drive. And that might arise from a belief that we are not called to be fully human persons as vowed religious. Rather, we're called to be something like a stained glass window or a lifeless statue or a holy card, but not a living, breathing, sexually motivated human person. And you can resolve the tension created by the clash between our human sexuality and our celibate commitment by somehow talking ourselves out of the celibate commitment without actually leaving it. It can come from entitlement. I've worked really hard all week. I've been very good. Now I'm going to relax and get my reward for that. I've heard that often in many ways. And then there's the compartmentalization. We divide ourselves into compartments and we don't let the compartments speak to each other. So when we're in our ministry, professional, public place, we're in our role as priest, as religious, and we do not let sexuality come into that role whatsoever. And when we step out of that role, we may step into our sexual role and we forget, or we deny or compartmentalize that we have a public commitment and a vow, a personal vow to be celibate and to be chaste. And we just walk into the sexuality department and that vow doesn't exist. I once heard a priest tell me that whenever he would prepare to celebrate the Eucharist, he would consciously and deliberately leave his sexuality in the sacristy. And then he would go out to the altar to celebrate the Eucharist. I don't know what that Eucharist looked like, but I can tell you that the reason he was seeing me is because his sexuality in the sacristy was running around wild. The compartmentalization does not work. So to live in the tension means that we honor and respect our sexuality for what is true about it. We let it be. We accept ourselves. And we see this not as a liability, but as an asset. It still drives us to connection. It still makes us desirous of relationships. It orders us towards the ultimate relationship of us with our Creator. It is a good and holy blessing, making us more fully human. But it also requires integrity about our celibate commitment. Without dismissing the idea that we will fail and we will. Nonetheless, the celibate commitment needs to have some sway and some power, and it has goodness in it, and we need to find that goodness. And its goodness is found in what it reveals about us and how it motivates and drives us to discover God loving us. We have to respect the full spectrum of emotion responses to the tensions and try to make our behavioral choices consistent with integrity, not in less than human ways and not more than human ways. And sometimes celibate chastity, a big part of a healthy life of celibate chastity, is acknowledging what we will not have, feeling sad about that, grieving for it without indulging ourselves, but grieving for it, allowing the emptiness that celibacy brings us into to give us a gift rather than just live in darkness. So in the article, I talk about these things of celibate moments, experiences of celibate chastity. We have them all the time. You know, something stirs our sexual energy, attraction, and desire. We realize we have a limit and a boundary of behavioral expression of sexuality. There's the tension between the two. And a celibate moment is an invitation to self-reflection that can be revelatory. What is it like to be me as I have this moment? How is this making me angry? How is this making me sad? How is this making me afraid? How am I experiencing shame? And how am I called to be fully human rather than more than human or less than human in this moment? These are going to be intense. Sometimes they can be seconds. Sometimes they can be for years. But to do it in integrity means to allow all three realities to be true and to live in them and to discover what we can learn and be drawn into as a result of that. So that's my presentation for this week. For your discussion board posts, I'm inviting you to list 3 or 4 prominent and prevalent illusions about sexuality, celibacy, and community life. Things that we tell ourselves are true, but they aren't true. Or things that other people believe are true, but aren't true about sexuality, celibacy, and community life. In contrast, what is the reality of living in the tension between sexuality and chastity, along with community life? In your opinion, how does the emerging understanding of human sexuality as diverse and pluriform, rather than binary and normative, impact the call to healthy human lives of celibate chastity lived within community life? I'm hoping that when we have the synchronous session this week, we can have a good conversation about that rather than me providing my opinions on it. We can have a good, healthy discussion over that because it is all around us. And in some cultures, it's getting more sway than others, but it is everywhere. And it's not going away. And how would you describe or recognize celibate chastity as sexual expression? What might that look like? How have you experienced it? What's it been like for you to know yourself as a sexual person with a commitment to celibate chastity? And the question is for the personal journals. Renew with gentleness and compassion your own sexual history. How has this impacted your ability to express yourself as a sexual being within the boundaries of celibate chastity? Recall any celibate choice points you may have encountered on your journey. What was it like to be you living in that tension? And how well did you navigate your way? And again, do this with all gentleness and compassion. Absolutely. Choose a different sexual orientation or gender identity from your own. What might it be like to be you if this were true of you? What might it be like to embrace a call to celibate chastity from this reality? Number 4 is a shadow question. This was a question that was put to me and my classmates when I was in psychology school. And we're being prepared to engage clients. And our professor gave us the exercise. If you were going to seduce a client, how would you go about doing it? So if you were going to seduce someone, how would you go about doing it? And finally, how would you complete this sentence? I know I am chaste when. How do you know you're living up to your commitment to celibate chastity? What are the signs and symptoms of a well-lived celibate chaste life? Now, those are for your personal journals. You may be free to bring them into our discussions or put them in the discussion board post, but they're really meant just to be for you, for your own self-reflection. And that's all for this week. So I'm looking forward to our conversation about this on Wednesday. And next week, we'll be talking about the experience of loneliness, that it's not being an unfortunate side effect, but how the inevitable loneliness of a celibate life is the point and what we can learn in that loneliness. Have a great week, everyone.